You're listening to Informed Dissent. If you're a longtime listener, welcome back. If you're new, welcome, and here's the lay of the land. I'm Jamie Reed, a lesbian and a whistleblower who worked inside a pediatric gender center. My co-hosts are Lauren Legere, also a lesbian and a longtime LGB advocate. Our other co-host is Cori, a gay man who underwent gender transition early in his life. All three of us come from the left, and none of us fit the story you've been told about who questions gender medicine. And that's not an accident. Every week, we will cover the headlines you need to know across medicine, law, sports, schools, and prisons. And then we dig in. The three of us, and most weeks, a guest worth hearing from. We built this show because we believe that the most important conversations about gender politics are the ones happening between people with real stakes and real disagreements. Free inquiry, honest argument, and dissent that's worth something because it's actually informed. Welcome. Welcome back to Informed Dissent. I'm Jamie Reed. We're recording this one at a strange moment because by the time you hear this, as it releases on July the 25th, we will be right at the precipice on Sunday, July the 26th, of the High Court hearing the judicial review of the Pathways puberty blocker trial. The clinical study that's out of the King's College London that the NHS is potentially going to use to reopen the door to pediatric medical transitions in Britain, after the CAS review for a short period had essentially shut it for everyone else. So a quick recap for anyone not fully caught up on this development out of the UK. After the UK banned puberty blockers for gender questioning kids, they said that it could still be inside of a potential research setting. The regulators then approved a research study that's called Pathways as the one sanctioned exception to that ban. This is set up to be a trial enrolling children as young as 11. In February, the UK's own medicines regulator, the MHRA, paused the trial outright, citing unqualified long-term risks to cognition, bone density, and fertility. Then this June, after some cosmetic changes to the consent paperwork and a minimum age requirement, the MHRA waived it back through, provided that the judicial review didn't stop at first. The judicial review was brought by three parties: detransitioner and longtime litigant Keira Bell, the Bayswater Support Group of Concerned Parents, and our guest today, James Esses. If you don't know James yet, you will. He is a psychotherapist, a former criminal barrister who spent years prosecuting child sexual abuse and exploitation cases before moving into mental health. He was expelled from his own master's program for raising concerns about gender ideology's effects on child safeguarding, and instead of going quiet, he sued the UK Council for Psychotherapy over it and won a landmark statement protecting gender-critical therapists across the country. Since then, he has founded Jest Therapy, co-founded Thoughtful Therapists, and started the Declaration for Biological Reality. So he's basically about as close as it gets if you're looking for a one-man safeguarding watchdog for the UK therapy profession. Today, we're talking to James about what's actually inside the Pathways trial protocol, what the judicial review argues the regulators got wrong, what happens to those 226 children enrolled in it if the court sides with him this weekend or doesn't. So, on to the show, as I usually say. I have a quick question, though, before we bring our guest in. For our paid subscribers, I want to run something by you. Between the three of us, sometimes Cori, Lauren, and I will end up having entire conversations that never make it into the episode. So I'm not talking about clips, not outtakes, but basically full sit down B-roll that could possibly stand as their own episodes. Stuff sometimes that starts out as prep for a guest, turns into its own thing, or a debate between the three of us that runs long enough to be its own hour. Um, I call it B-roll. Honestly, at this point, it's more like shadow sessions. We're trying to figure out whether that's something paid subscribers would actually want as bonus content. So tell us, is this something that you would be interested in listening to? You can drop us a comment, reply in the email, or tell us by email at lgbcourage.org. We won't build it if nobody wants it, so this one's kind of on you. Vote and let us know. Okay, back to James. James, thank you so much for joining us on Informed Dissent.
Pleasure. Good to be here.
So, our audience just heard a little bit about your background. What I want to ask you about is after you are expelled from your master's program, you win your legal challenge over it, you are now running an organization called Thoughtful Therapists.
Yes, well, actually, there's a couple of organizations I'm involved in, but yes, that is one. And we are very much campaigning against I'm going to say, the infiltration of gender ideology into the therapeutic professions. I also run a directory called Just Therapy, which is basically a directory of ethical therapists who aren't going to bring ideology into the therapy room because there's a real lack of that, unfortunately, in modern society.
Perfect. So you are now in current direct care, direct practice. What does your caseload actually look like? Are you seeing kids? Are you seeing adolescents? Are you seeing adults? And how have you seen that shift?
Yeah, well, I'm a bit of a generalist, or I try to be. So I work with all ages for all manner of issues. But the bulk of my casework since I set up private practice has been in the form of children who are trans identified, and they're getting referred to me via their parents. The parents often don't know where to turn to because they don't trust that therapists are not going to simply affirm their children down this path, whereas they know for a fact that I won't. And that already causes some complications, right? Because therapy tends to work best when someone is sorted out of their own volition.
Mhm.
Whereas these children are resistant, particularly if they Google my name. And I've had some on the first meeting accuse me of being a conversion therapist. So that's the kind of territory we're in here. But most of the children that get referred to me, I work with very effectively, and we build up a strong therapeutic alliance. And my job there is to explore what's going on, the origins, because there are always origins for these feelings of unhappiness or disease in one's body, and to look at what the path forward is for them, and to challenge them when they're engaging in unhelpful or illogical thinking, right? Which I do with all my clients, no matter what they come to me about. This isn't specific to this issue. And because I draw an equivalence between medical transitioning and self-harm, I have in my mind a place where I would like to try and get them towards, which is towards self-acceptance and embracing who they are and being able to move through the world without a lifetime on medication and surgery. That's the ideal, but it's not always that easy, unfortunately.
You said publicly that most of your patients are autistic. Is that
Yeah.
something you're still seeing? And then I want to dig into that a little bit. Is this the cohort where they are what would originally be called maybe high functioning or more Asperger's? I'm assuming you're not seeing the kind of real classical autistic that has um, serious communication issues, real kind of deficits in the ability to navigate the world. Are you seeing more of the higher functioning Is that the autistic presentation that you feel like you're seeing?
On the whole, well, not always, to be honest. I have seen a bit of a mix. Um, but yes, on the whole, the children I'm working with are very highly functioning. I mean, very intelligent, very sharp, switched on, and certainly know their own minds, or think they know their own minds anyway. And they've done all the research and the reading, and they've got all their arguments prepared by the time they sit down in front of me. I think they're already expecting to have a kind of debate, like we're in a courtroom or something like that. So, part of my job is actually to try and break down some of those barriers and build up this strong therapeutic relationship. But I also have seen children who are much lower functioning, and who I think have been caught up in this because they find it difficult to navigate um, complex feelings, and so they latch on to a more simplistic narrative around who they are. So I see the full range, but yes, I think it's fair to say that every child I have worked with to date who is trans-identified has either been diagnosed with or has suspected autism. Yeah.
Okay. I want to kind of change gears a little bit. So you are working on a lawsuit, which we're going to get to in a minute, but you're I don't know all the legal terms for the UK, but the groups or individuals that you are working with on the side of include Keira Bell and a group called Bayswater. Is that correct? Are those your two? Are they co-defendants?
Claimants, co-claimants,
Okay.
or yes, we're the three of us are the claimants in this case. I mean, Keira Bell is a very high-profile, very brave and persistent detransitioner who has taken multiple legal cases against the UK government because of what she went through. Bayswater is a support group for parents of trans-identified children, and they do a lot of campaigning work, um, as well as supporting each other with what they're going through. So we all
Can I
bring something different to the table. Yeah.
can I ask, a lot of the parents here in the US who have trans-identified kids really struggle with not being public facing. They can't say who they are. Like they take on pseudonyms. They have to do all of these things to protect the relationships with their kids. Are there individuals in the Bayswater group in the UK that are public facing? Do they talk publicly about the relationship challenges or like what is kind of the dynamic with that group in the UK?
It for the reasons that you've already laid out, it tends towards the wanting to be behind the scenes and wanting anonymity as much as possible. So, it's Bayswater, the kind of the group is the claimant. There is a lead individual from Bayswater who we are working alongside, but their details, name, etc., will not be in the public domain. We had to seek an order from the judge for anonymity on that basis.
Okay.
Because yeah, well, for the reasons you set out. So
Okay.
that's still the climate, unfortunately, in the United Kingdom, where people feel that they need to have anonymity in these matters.
Well, and Cori, I'm going to jump over to you for a minute because I don't know of any parent group in the US who's taken on a case like this parent group seems to be doing in the UK. Can you think of an equivalent group in the US that is legally
Mm,
becoming a claimant?
Maybe in adjacent or similar types of policy domains. I know that there's been a number of parents who've challenged, for example, the transitioning of children in schools. Uh, and that I think that's relevant, that's tangential to this, but not specifically challenging the medical practitioners as a group.
Okay. And Bayswater Support Group, I think, started in 2019. Um, And I also think that they have done some school safeguarding. They've worked on CPS, your equivalent to like Child Protective Services. I mean, these are also parents who would be at risk of their kids if they don't affirm similar environment to the UK is to here. Okay.
Very, very much so, and all the more so given that this government is currently looking at passing legislation on conversion practices, which would criminalize parents potentially for having a challenging conversation with their child on this topic. So yeah, it's still a climate of fear in the United Kingdom, unfortunately.
Okay, so let's get up to the puberty blocker trial. So it's called the Pathways trial.
Mm.
And what I want to start with is what is the trial actually proposing? And right now you are at a judicial review, is my understanding. So walk us through, if you can, what is this trial proposing?
Well, we have to go back a couple of years to when the government, now at the time it was a Conservative government, but they banned puberty blockers. And I still remember that day and how joyous an occasion it was. But perhaps that was a bit naive of me at the time to celebrate too soon. But that was on the basis of what they deemed to be, and this is their words, right, not mine, an unacceptable safety risk. It's pretty clear cut like that. So I thought, well, this is the end of things, right? Because if they're banning them and they say there's an unacceptable safety risk, this must be dead in the water. Time goes on, we get a new government, a Labour government, and they convert that ban, which was temporary at the time, into a permanent ban, or an indefinite ban, at least, on the same basis. So myself and fellow campaigners think that this is over. And then a few months down the line, we get told, actually, we have banned these, but we're going to look to do a trial into them. And the justification for that was in the Cass review, because it is true that Hilary Cass, in her review of gender services in the United Kingdom, did suggest that there could be merits to a trial. And so that's been latched onto. And the trial is to now investigate the efficacy and safety of puberty blockers, even though, remember, the government already said there's an unacceptable safety risk. So that, I mean, it doesn't even make sense on that basis alone. And in essence, there are going to be hundreds of children put forward to take puberty blockers. Originally, children as young as 9 were going to be able to partake, but after a lot of noise and concerns, the bodies responsible for the trial have very generously increased that age by 2 years, so 11-year-olds. And they kind of threw that piece of meat to us recently as if we would be satisfied with that. Anyway, so 11-year-olds will be able to take part in this trial. And the way they're essentially looking to monitor success is in the only way they know how, which is through surveys and questionnaires. So they'll be offering questionnaires to these children before and after they take the puberty blockers, asking them how happy they are, etc. Because that's all that they can do. There's no objective test because there's nothing actually wrong with these children. There's nothing to be cured here. So that's quite concerning. And obviously, the risks remain, but Cass and other people seem to think that it's justifiable to use hundreds of children as guinea pigs to try and, confirm once and for all if these risks really are present. Thousands of children were put on puberty blockers at the Tavistock Clinic, which is now shut down. There was very poor data capturing and long-term follow-up, but there is data out there that hasn't been properly retrieved and gone through. And it's called this linkage study. That was something else Cass spoke about, this kind of linkage study to try and kind of bridge that gap. And we've all said, well, that should take place before any trial. I mean, you should be using the existing data before experimenting on brand new children. But that was ignored as well. So they are looking into that existing data, but they're cracking on with the trial regardless.
Okay, a couple of things I want to kind of unpack from what you just talked about. So
Yeah.
Okay. The first one I want to start with is the concept of efficacy and safety. So Have they spelled out, is it efficacious? What are they trying to get at? Is it efficient at blocking puberty? Is that what you feel like the question is? Have they spelled out what they're even like treating?
Well, they say they're treating gender dysphoria, and so they're tracking dysphoric feelings, but also just general well-being and happiness on the part of these children. Essentially, my take on it is that if a few years down the line, a child answers this survey and says, since taking puberty blockers, I feel far better in myself and far happier, they view that as a success and a tick in the box as to why puberty blockers should be used um, for these children. As regards safety, well, they're aware of the risks and they actually have, because this is a clinical trial, they have to relay those risks to these children and their parents as part of it. So that they're more than aware of them. But I think what they're looking at, and to be fair, this is a question that you look at generally in clinical trials. You look at the cost benefit analysis. You look at whether the benefit outweighs the cost or the risks with any form of medical treatment. So they're applying that lens to it. But as I said, we already know the harms caused. And it was those harms that led to them being banned in the first place. It's very, very unusual to have a clinical trial into something that was banned because of serious concerns in the first place. You often do trials into things that are novel or new or untested, whereas we do have data and anecdotes. We've already got the evidence of the harm caused to these children. You only need to speak to them to find that out.
James, for other
Yes.
types of medical trials, often the reason that you would try to do a medical intervention is that absent that, that some greater harm would happen. So if somebody has cancer, the cancer treatment itself might be very risky or it might cause additional harms, but it's judged as being better than not any intervention at all. So for these trials, how do they characterize the risk of not having an intervention? Is the child will be less happy? Like what is the risk that they're protecting against?
Well, historically, and this narrative still exists, unfortunately, even though it's been debunked, there's still a lot put on this notion of suicidality amongst this cohort of children, if they're not allowed to medically transition. Like I said, that's been debunked. There was an independent review that the UK government commissioned, which essentially debunked that. But that they do seem to be latching on to that. Um, the basis of the trial actually is ridiculously one of belief. It's there are people who believe these things work and help these children, so therefore we should do it. I mean, that's something Hilary Cass herself said recently, which is really quite shocking. She said, literally in the same breath, we don't have any evidence these things work, but there's a lot of people out there who genuinely believe they do. And so we owe it to them to try it out. And in my mind, belief um, should and can never be uh, a reason to engage in medical experimentation. I often say this, but this is true. There are people out there who genuinely believe that ingesting large amounts of baking soda can cure forms of cancer. Right? That's a genuine belief among some. But I keep saying the UK government's not running a baking soda trial anytime soon, right? It's the same thing here. There's no evidence these things work. There's merely a belief in some people's heads that they're good. And we can talk about Cass in a bit, but I'm increasingly concerned by what she is spouting. I don't trust her anymore, if I'm honest.
Could we try just a little thought exercise? Because I'm just trying to I want to try to imagine what they're thinking about, right? I want to try to model their mindset. So I want to try two different games that are related. One is let's put ourselves 10 years into the future, looking backwards. So from their perspective, 10 years from now, looking backwards, what's a best case outcome?
The, the best, I know, I don't know if I get to participate in your
Yeah,
game.
absolutely. This is for everybody.
I mean, what they think would be the best outcome is that they would show data in the self-report to claim some sort of success.
Right. So what do we imagine that that would be from their perspective? What metric are they looking at?
Oh, James, jump in if you want, because what I know is that they will get some self-report questionnaires that will measure a positive self-report that some of these children, a percentage of them probably, it'll probably be about a third, will say that they are better and have decent metric scores to self-report that. But some of them will report no change. Some of them will be unable to self-report. This is where it gets tricky. I think that this intervention on its own is going to be what's considered a wash scientifically. So some will say better, some will be worse, some will have no change. But if it's based solely on self-report, then you'll see a similar Dutch outcome.
Yeah. I mean, the questionnaires they're using are so wide ranging, and it ranges from questions around hobbies,
Hmm.
friendships, to things like how they view themselves, how they are in their body, anxiety they have, um,
But
sex, their sex
there'll
lives
be
as well.
Sorry, but there will be no way to pull apart that any of those metrics got better based on the puberty blocker versus they just grew up or their family environment changed or their school environment. Like, there's no way to pull apart that that is what made those changes.
No, exactly. But also that you can't do any form of, let's say, placebo testing here or blind testing. So as a result, what they're doing is it's not like one cohort, because there's two cohorts in this trial. It's not like one gets puberty blockers and the others don't, because that wouldn't work, right? Because it's going to be bloody obvious whether you're on puberty blockers or not. So as a result, they're doing one cohort starting puberty blockers on a certain date, and then they're just having a delay before the other cohorts start the same puberty blockers. So it's not.
That's not really,
No, it's not really a trial. It's not really a trial
that's
in
not
many
true. Yeah.
ways, and there's no way of measuring this. And human beings' emotions and how their lives progress over the coming years as part of the trial, because this trial's lasting a number of years. It's it's not as simplistic that you could ever point towards one thing as having made the difference. Um, I still think there's far too much emphasis being put on happiness, which might sound very odd as a psychotherapist, right? Because these days it's all about making people as happy as they possibly can be. I don't think that's the answer, actually. A lot of human beings, particularly a lot of children, pursue things that make them very happy that are in fact very bad for them and very bad for society. So I don't, and I say this to some of the teenagers I work with, actually. Um, I'm less concerned about their happiness and I'm more concerned about whether they are holistically, objectively well. I think there's a difference between those two things.
Well,
Cori, can we throw this back at you though? What do they think they would find as a success?
well, I got to have a conversation with Annalie de Vries last year, and this is not what she said. This is my impression walking away from it. The To the extent that the researchers feel like their patients have plausibly integrated as the opposite sex, including their appearance uh, and the clinician's subjective experience of the patient. That's really seems to be the top of mind feeling of what success looks like.
So they can falsify and pretend that they're the opposite sex in a way that is integrated and able to be demonstrated to the therapist.
Yes, and I guess what we would call that is passing. How well are these patients passing as ersatz members of the opposite sex.
Cori, I know you were going to do one other thought experiment, but James, I did want to ask this one question of you. This cohort, the individuals in this study, they will be receiving essentially intensive psychotherapy, will they not?
There is some measure for kind of psychotherapeutic conversations, but no, this isn't a trial into psychotherapy. This is a trial into puberty blockers,
I
right?
know, but what I'm trying to get at is, again, this will be another issue where you
Confounder.
cannot, it's another confounder. You can't pull apart if it's the psychotherapy that,
Exactly.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But you're talking too much sense here, right? Because this is the problem. The trial is inherently flawed. Forget about personal views on gender versus sex. Like as a medical trial, it's flawed. And there are so many other concerns we've had in which form part of our judicial review, which are, I won't go into now, but even just in terms of how the decision was reached by the relevant regulatory bodies, like not having properly constituted meetings at which things were decided. Like there's been a whole host of errors and mistakes that have happened from the very beginning here. One of the lead clinicians leading the trial raised concerns about it. He's a professor. Um, and he essentially got booted off the trial. They said because of some comments he had made on social media. I think he had supported some things J.K. Rowling had said, something like that. Anyway, they got rid of him. So there's real concerns about what's driving the individuals at the heart of pushing forward with this trial. Also, we've had multiple health secretaries, like Secretary of State for Health in the UK, since this trial began. Um, Both have continued to champion this. Um, they've they've not been willing to row back on it. They continue to latch on to Hillary Cass as their justification, and they say, well, Cass says we should have it, and it was in the Cass review, which was an excellent review, therefore we should carry on with it.
I'd say our side did that for a while too, after the cast review was published, using a citation to authority. But actually, I want to try to do the second part of this thought experiment because I think it's revealing. So if we imagine them 10 years from now looking backwards and they think it's a failure, what would have had to happen for it to be a failure? For them to say the results were negative, what would have had to happen?
The, yeah, that's it's an excellent question, particularly because in the process of medical transitioning, puberty blockers are just the first stage in the process, right? So even if
Yes,
at the end of the trial someone turns around and says, "No, I'm still feeling suicidal, I'm still feeling bad in myself," well, they can turn around and say, "Well, that's because, you haven't tried those hormones yet, you haven't moved on to the next stage of transitioning yet. This is just the first stage of it." So yeah,
it's
I agree with you.
minority threat. It's society hates you. That's why you feel that way.
Well, as another example of this, the Chen study, the famous Chen study here from the US, did have completed suicides in it after they were medicalized and affirmed, and that was still considered a study that showed that it was efficacious and positive and safe. Uh, Cori, this is a problem though. The fact that um, I don't sorry, let me get my thoughts in order. For a little bit there, Cori, I was arguing with you that we needed this study to potentially go forward to settle a question once and for all. And so that the public could see, listen, a real trial happened,
Mm.
outcome was poor, and we're going to lay this to rest. But as you frame those two questions, I do realize I don't know that we will ever have that occur. And James, this is one of the things I want to know what's going on in the UK. Do you get the sense that the public is supporting this, is not? Um, do people just want one final crack at a try?
And herein lies the problem, because this will never be a settled issue. It will never be a settled issue, because what you this is what I think you're likely to have as the end result of this trial. You're going to have a lot of children who are very badly damaged. They're going to have further physiological health complications. They may be infertile. They're going to have brittle bones and all the rest of it. And more importantly, from my perspective as a psychotherapist, they are going to continue to genuinely believe that they can be the opposite sex, which is the height of delusional thinking. So they are objectively going to be unwell, but I suspect most will report that they are doing fantastically well, and they feel great in themselves, and they're excited for what the future holds and the next steps of transitioning. And so then you're going to have to juggle these two things. And if this trial goes ahead, and I hope to God it doesn't, it will be very interesting to see what happens and what the government does with this information, because are they going to prioritize self-surveyed happiness over objective physiological health? And my suspicion is that they are, particularly because we're introducing more and more this notion of gender identity into our legal and societal framework. I think that's exactly what they're going to do. But this can never be a settled question, because the people pushing for puberty blockers, they know what the harms are. Um, the damage is the thing that they're seeking, right? Like, they're fully aware of it. They want it regardless. So that's why this will never be settled. And even if we have this trial, it won't be deemed sufficient. Um, so I don't think we're going to answer the question once and for all.
And it cannot be answered because, as we're, at least among the three of us, as we're finding from this thought experiment, it's impossible to answer what is the best case for the outcome and what is the worst case. We just, at this point, how do we know?
Exactly.
There's a little ounce of me that I always try to hold on to a little bit of hope. A puberty blocker on its own is a very challenging intervention for children to always self-report happiness in. It does throw their mood. It throws them into this psychological stopping point where their hormones in their bodies, like, I feel like I can imagine what this might feel like just based on so many of the kids that I saw with the puberty blocker put in, is that you're kind of chugging along and all of a sudden you hit this wall really abruptly, just in your own brain. And especially, I feel like for the girls who are put on this, it's like menopause hits them out of nowhere really suddenly. And I did see it tank a lot of kids' mood, emotional stability. I saw parents even reporting, listen, you put this thing in my kid and now they're horrid. Like they have, they do have physiological effects. I think if the study is going to proceed, and they at least do any sort of objective physiological health metric, I do think it does cause harm. Just right there, right as it's playing out, the first few weeks it's in. Like,
Yeah. But this is the harm is what these children are after. I see it in my own client cohorts. I've got clients, teenagers who want to go on cross-sex hormones. I talk to them, I try and tell them about the risks of infertility. They don't care. They
No,
welcome that. This is good
right.
in their eyes.
Of
Um,
course, naturally, because you're not
yeah,
mature enough to want children at that age.
this is it. It's also given, because it's very, we're living in quite fluid times, and I realize that's maybe not the best term to use given this whole gender fluidity stuff. But we are, there's a lot of moving pieces. The UK government also the NHS recently said they were going to stop prescribing cross-sex hormones to 16 and 17-year-olds now in this country, which is okay, that's good. But now these children aged 11 going on puberty blockers, but they cannot technically avail of cross-sex hormones until they're 18. What are they doing in those 7 years exactly? You know,
That's a significant bone density risk. That is a significant risk to leave someone in that suspended state for that long.
They'll probably just get black market hormones and then
But
meanwhile.
okay, Cori, are you good on your thought experiment? Because now I feel utterly depressed and
I have that effect on you, Jamie.
you really do. But I want to ask James about the actual judicial review. Like, what is happening? What are you doing? And then I think we should talk about Cass.
Yeah, so look, it's a long process. We started the work on this last year. Also, it actually it probably should already have been determined by now, but the relevant regulatory bodies wanted a delay to proceedings while they reconsidered things. That's when they made that decision to increase the age from 9 to 11. So there's been about a 2 month delay to proceedings. The other thing to note is that originally we were given assurances that they would not start recruiting any children to the trial until after the judicial review finished, which we hoped would be the end of July. But then they brought about a 2 month delay. They've now gone back on that. And so what they're saying is come 1st of August, even though the judicial review won't have been heard, they're cracking on with recruitment of children, which is extremely bad faith. So as a result of that, later on this month, on the 27th and 28th of July, we're having to go to the court to seek essentially a kind of emergency injunction to block them from starting recruitment until the end of the legal proceedings. So, so that's where we're at. And if we're unsuccessful in that, then yes, come 1st of August, they're going to start enlisting children to this, which is extremely concerning. The substantive judicial review hearings, we hope will be heard in the autumn, probably in October. So we'll have an outcome later on this year. But there may well be appeals to come. You know, we've already said that if we were to lose in the High Court, we would look to appeal it to the Court of Appeal. And the other side may well do that as well. So this isn't going anywhere fast.
Can I ask a question that might be faux pas in the UK? But how are you paying for this? I'm assuming you have attorneys and legal scholars. I mean, how is this being paid for?
And look, that's a very good question because I mean I don't think it's as expensive as in the US, but in the UK, you know, this is still expensive stuff. This is still going to cost hundreds of thousands of pounds in its totality. We're being funded by an organization, a campaign group, essentially. They're called Citizen Go. They campaign around the world on different issues. We're aligned with them on this topic. They offered to support us with it. They themselves generate money through fundraising, and they've been specifically fundraising for members of the public for this cause. Um, I mean, if it wasn't for them and their generosity, we wouldn't be able to do this. We sure as hell wouldn't have been able to just crowdfund it, I think, individually ourselves or pay for it ourselves. So we're very fortunate. And th this organization has said to us that they're willing to support us all the way. Even if we needed to go up to the Supreme Court, they're willing to back us. So that, I mean, that's been a huge weight off our shoulders because we haven't had to think about the money.
That's amazing. Okay, let's talk about Hillary Cass for a minute. So I'm gonna first admit that I'm really struggling with some of the changes that, or at least the language that I'm hearing from her. So when I was still working in a gender center, I remember when the interim report came out. And I remember this real feeling that this report was directly speaking to what I was seeing in clinical practice. I emailed it to the team I was on and said, this is really serious. This is explaining part of what we are seeing going so wrong here. I think we need to take this seriously. And then when the final report came out, I think I even tweeted something along the lines of feeling vindicated at that point. So people are going to hear or say right now, Cass is backing this trial and think that maybe she's reversed herself. Do you feel like this is a reversal, or was this baked in from the Cass report?
Well, it is in the report in black and white. I think similarly to you, when I read the report, and I was focusing on the headline items and the fact that it was off the back of her report that the Tavistock was closed. And I was so frankly overjoyed to see this being now finally recognized and taken seriously by the UK government. Um, so I think I and others kind of overlooked that reference to a trial and thought, maybe. I also always got the sense she was trying to back both horses as
Yes,
well.
I
She wasn't
do.
one.
Yes,
Yeah, and there was a lot of ideologically based language in the report as
there
well,
was.
which didn't sit easy with me. But I kind of thought, look, naively I thought it wouldn't happen. But I have to hold my hands up and say that I did overlook that, and I mean, perhaps I was blinded by the good things and I avoided the negative things. But if I really think about it, I think the signs were always there, and she now is in a much more comfortable position to be able to speak more freely on these topics because the report is concluded. She was nominated and given a peerage, right, which means that she
Yeah.
sits in the House of Lords now as Baroness Cass, and she's become much more vocal on this topic actually since the report was published and she became a Baroness, and she is pushing hard for this trial, and she's coming out with some crazy statements that I think are kind of the antithesis of good medical practice. She's been wading into arguments about bathrooms as well, and same-sex space provision. So I don't know what she's doing. So there's theories going around that she fears for her safety because she's been threatened by some on the other side of the argument. I mean, I don't think so. I think this is probably how she's always felt. It's just now she has the freedom to say it, you know. Um,
So I think that part of her argument has been about the concept of harm reduction. Has she not said, well, kids are going to get blockers one way or another. It's better that they get them in a controlled trial than the black market. Are you hearing that? Do you see any, you know, is she right about that?
well, that is definitely her primary argument at the moment. She's really enjoying running that one, and I think I've kind of on X and other platforms said to her, "Okay, Hillary, are we then going to legalize heroin?" And some people say I'm being facetious, but I'm really not. I mean, I'm really not. But she's loving that argument at the moment. Um, it is true to some extent. Some of the clients I've worked with have been open with me about the fact that they have secured, well, cross-sex hormones or puberty blockers kind of illicitly. So I'm not saying these things don't happen, but that's not a reason to legalize them. It's far from it, actually. So I don't know why she's latched onto this. I really don't. It's a bizarre thing for a doctor to do. Um, she's kind of clutching at straws really because there isn't a good case to be made for this trial. So she's kind of it seems to be looking for anything, but she's really pushing hard for it. I mean, I publicized on X last week a letter that was leaked to me that she had sent around to every single parliamentarian in the House of Lords, basically just pushing for the trial again. Like she's more vocal now than she's ever been, and I I find it very concerning. I find it very sad. I actually think that if she withdrew her support from the trial would fall because our health secretaries continue to use her as the sole justification for the trial, you know, but she doesn't seem to be letting up at all with this. So I think for that reason, this trial is not going to stop organically. The only way it's going to stop is if we force it to happen through this legal action and have a court block it. Otherwise, this is going to run the course.
I had just a follow up. I don't know the landscape in the UK as much as I do here in the US, but you kind of alluded to your own clients who've gotten black market or access. Um, do you feel like there is a cohort of either teen patients or families that um, they're going to get these blockers regardless? So then what is the response to that? Are those patients welcome um, in general care? Do you think that that should be, I mean, in your perfect world, does that become child protective services if a parent does put their child on black market puberty blockers? I mean, where would that go?
Yeah. Uh, if if parents and look, parents are often put in a very difficult position here with this. And I
Because
work with parents as well.
didn't Hillary talk recently in Parliament about a 2-year-old who was socially transitioned?
Uh, yes, she did, and but she's kind of provided some case studies in Parliament, but then retracted that and said there wasn't actually a specific case. It's more a kind of amalgamation of things that she's kind of heard, and she's kind of pieced it herself into a case study. She's kind of invented. I don't know. It's all very bizarre, really. But parents are put in a difficult position. But if there are parents out there who are, particularly if this stuff is illegal, if they are procuring illegal drugs for their children, then I mean, yes, it should definitely be a matter for social services, irrespective. I know parents are under a lot of pressure here. I don't care. Child safeguarding has to come first at the end of the day with this. So, I, but the problem is so many children are desperate to get this stuff, so they will try and get it through any means necessary. And whether that's buying it through the black market, whether that's claiming suicidality, children. Children are very good at getting what they want. I was a child once. We all were. I think we can reflect on that. Children are also very good at manipulation, emotional manipulation, particularly with their parents. Okay, we just know these things. So I'm not surprised that there's lots of these children saying that they're feeling suicidal when they can't get this stuff, you know? And I'm not saying that there have not been children who have quite tragically tried to take their own lives over this. And that just goes to show the level of distress that's been caused by this entire issue. But on the whole, I think it is because children know that that's how they're going to get their own way. In fact, again, I've had certain clients who've essentially admitted that to me, that they have played up feelings of suicidality to get what they want. So I think we need to bear that in mind. But I think, I mean, I think we need to be applying kind of DEA, to use the American acronym, like levels of enforcement on this stuff. Like it's like if there are provision of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones in the black market, we need to find out where that's coming from and come down on these people like a ton of bricks and lock them away for a very long period of time. But we're living in very strange political times. The Green Party here in the United Kingdom, who's gaining prominence, they want to legalize most forms of drugs, partly for that reason. So we still seem to be in this battle about what we do with illicit drugs more broadly, and now puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones are now considered kind of part of that melee. My view as a kind of conservative is no, we maintain these things as unlawful and we lock people up if they break the law. That's it.
Cori, your libertarian views over here. Do you want to weigh in on the illicit substanceness of puberty blockers?
No, I don't want to too much, especially since the American perspective is going to be different from the UK perspective. But I will say that minors don't have all of the same sort of judgment or evaluation faculties that adults have. And that's one of the reasons why they're classified differently under the law, is because we protect them until such a time as we believe that they do have those faculties. Now, whether they actually have them in fact or not on an individual basis is different from the legal cutoff. But we have to consider the law works differently for adults, even parents, right? Parents have a responsibility to get their children to an age where we believe that they're now adults, right? That's the role of the parent. But to take this back to the study that we're looking at here, these kids cannot make informed dissent. Excuse me, that's our podcast. They cannot make informed consent decisions, and it's really interesting that just from this philosophical standpoint that we're saying, we're going to entrust parents with the decision of turning their children into sex pretenders by permanently and irreversibly modifying their reproductive capabilities. And that sort of moral and ethical plane really, I know that, James, that's one of the things that you're speaking to, but how does that even fit into the study itself? I mean, is there a whole ethical section of their proposal?
Parents provide consent, children provide assent.
But surely there must be like some sort of ethicist that is part of their team, right?
Well, they're essentially saying so long as we give them, a full understanding of what the risks are here, that's it. But we point out, as you have, Cori, you've pointed out the fact that there are question marks around children and what they can and cannot consent to. And this is completely out of step with other movements by the UK government. I mean, just recently it was announced that there's going to be a social media ban for children.
Yeah.
Just yesterday, it was announced that under 16-year-olds will not be able to purchase energy drinks anymore. So I can't.
That's easy to get around. You just have to put testosterone in them.
Yeah. Look, I wish you were joking. I think you're half joking, but there's a shred of truth to that. But the fact that a 15-year-old will now not be able to buy a can of Red Bull, but an 11-year-old will be able to block their puberty. I mean, it's just so illogical. It's so inconsistent, and that's because we're leading on this trial from an ideological point of view. And the problem is that over many years, this notion of gender dysphoria and kind of this being a mental health condition has been watered down. So now it's an identity. And we've had gender identity written into our legislative framework. And so now it's a choice. It's a lifestyle choice. It's not a delusional mental health condition.
Could you just, I think it helps to reorient every once in a while. What is gender dysphoria from your perspective?
Well, from my perspective is what's different to others' perspectives, because actually even the diagnosis and definition of gender dysphoria has been watered down now in the various diagnostic manuals over recent years. In my view, it is a sense of dis-ease in one's sexed body and or a belief that you are or can become the other sex. I mean, kind of at its core. I don't think that everyone who wants to transition has that necessarily. I do think there's an element of kind of fad about this, and certainly children coming out with new pronouns, etc., in their classroom. I think many are doing it because it's trendy, right? So I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all approach, but certainly for the cohort that I see, yeah, and we have other conditions that have dysphoria or dysmorphia as part of them. I mean, to be honest, it's kind of part of the human condition to be uneasy in parts of ourselves. I mean, there's not a single person alive that doesn't have something that they wouldn't want to change in themselves. But historically, the message has been, particularly for children, life is tough, but you've got to get through it. Puberty is a particularly tough time, but you will come out the other end of it. Whereas now they're being told, oh, there's a pill for that. There's a surgery for that.
All right. One of the things that with the memes that I see on the trans side quite often is, oh, one day science will be able to give you a perfect realization of the opposite sex physiologically. Like you'll have your genes rewritten. That's fantasy, right?
By being beamed up to your spaceship And
Well,
how?
it'll be like you'll have a CRISPR custom
Oh,
uh,
oh
a
God.
virus
Oh.
will come and rewrite all your whatever science fiction stuff that they think of. Do your clients come in with those types of misunderstandings about the possibilities, or are they kind of
Um,
realistic?
well, most of them know what sex they are.
Yeah.
They just wish they were the other sex, and I think most of them, if they can, as we discussed earlier, quote unquote pass, that's sufficient for them, actually. They don't need their DNA rewritten. I mean, if it was offered to them, I'm sure they'd take it, but they don't, for
Mm.
them, passing is sufficient. Um, and actually, a lot of them are convinced that they do pass on the basis that, well, my teachers and my friends refer to me as my new pronouns. And I challenge them on this as well, because, you know, and I don't think it's unreasonable to ask the question, are they treating you that way because they genuinely think that you've become the other sex? Or are they treating you that way because they like you and they don't want to hurt your feelings?
Yeah.
Because that's a large part of this, actually. Um, so yeah, but I've also read some of those weird and wonderful promises that you've alluded to about kind of the future of trans healthcare and all the rest of it. But I mean, if you look at where we're at the moment, and you see the outcome of some of this kind of sex reassignment surgeries. I mean, it's a horror show. I mean, it is so unrealistic, and it's so far apart from what these parts of our bodies are meant to do. I mean, it's like a pale imitation. It's and yet there's many who seem more than satisfied with it. Um, It's not good. And, I mean, well, now I'm just moving away from children, but I'm actually presenting at a conference next week. I'm calling for a criminalization of all forms of sex reassignment surgery, including for adults. I mean, children are the focus in my mind, and that's where all the public debate is. But we also have a duty to protect vulnerable adults from themselves. And the fact we're allowing adults to go and have their genitals amputated, for me, is not okay. So I think it should be illegal to do that, which I know is contentious. There's actually a lot in many in my circle who disagree with me on that, and they say adults should be able to do what they want. I generally am a proponent of freedom, but we have limits in my view.
I wanted to ask one other question about your patients, if that's all right, or your relationship, or your expectations with your patients, because
Yeah.
I one of the things that I have experienced with my own social circles is that every single one of these kids who identifies as trans is also a nascent socialist. They all adopt very far left views. They affiliate with the term queer. So, from your perspective, if your patient still had all of those other sort of traits or first of all, maybe you haven't seen that in your patients, but I suspect it's probably kind of common. Would you consider it a success from your point of view if a patient desisted from a trans identity but still persisted with all of those other types of associated markers that are the queer ideology or leftist ideology?
Um, okay, well, there's two parts to that. The first is I do see that on occasion, but not across the board, actually. And I've had some teenage clients who believe themselves to be trans who are actually very much right-leaning and very conservative in their values. So this bridges the kind of full gamut, I think, of politics. But yes, it's primarily prevalent among certain groups because that's where this ideology has flourished the most. Would I view it? The second question was about viewing it as a success. I don't. I actually try and leave politics more broadly out of the therapy room. I mean, that's kind of the basis on which I'm offering this particular therapy that I offer, because far too many therapists do bring it in and they chastise their clients for not having the kind of correct political beliefs, etc.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, my clients say all manner of things that I fundamentally disagree with and I think are kind of misguided. That's not what I'm there to do. And I'm not there to kind of try and reprogram their brains in that way, you know. So, um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose the reason I'm asking, and I didn't articulate my premise very well, but from my experience, that particular leftist view is extremely bonded to gender ideology. And so if a person says that they desist, or if they can experience embodiment without having to modify their bodies, is that affinity to that ideology a constant threat that they'll regress? That's really what I mean to ask.
It'll pull them back in.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are elements of that, and I will challenge those. So I don't think that I'm going to say that, supporting a particular political party, for example, is, something for me to be concerned about. However, I do see in a lot of these clients elements of victimhood mentality,
Mhm.
self-obsession, and navel gazing. Those are things I will challenge. Again, I feel that those are prevalent more amongst certain demographics in the world at present. But yes, I will hook onto those because I don't believe that that's in their best interests either. So yes, I think my answer probably is it depends on exactly what it is that they're presenting with. Um, Look, it's
So,
very difficult. It's very difficult because it is not my job as a therapist to tell people what to do. But as I said to you at the beginning, I draw an equivalence between this and self-harm. And so therapeutically, ethically speaking, I can't abide by it. I always say to my clients, and I mean this, they're in charge. They're going to make their own decisions in life. It's not for me to try and pressure them and tell them what to do. But if I've got concerns about their future and I think they're going about life the wrong way and they're going to end up regretting something, it's my duty to tell them that. And they don't always like to hear that, but I don't think I'd be doing my job if I didn't do that.
I, uh, I, I didn't want to do this, but I think you just brought us back to harm reduction as a model with the self-harm, and that there are models that address self-harm as how can we reduce the harm that it causes, not ex like to move someone towards extinguishing it. And so I want to just tell a brief story from my time in the clinic about harm reduction as this idea, because there is a model that self-harm can be extinguished through harm reduction. And I think that Hilary Cass has latched onto this concept as a harm reduction concept. Um, Towards the end of my tenure, there was a teen patient, a young man who came in high distress, did not have a therapist at all, and he self-reported to the endocrinologist that he had been purchasing hormones on the black market. And the endocrinologist at this point tried to convince the team that we don't need to wait for a letter of support from a therapist. Now, mind you, our model was it was fine for this kid to see a therapist one time only to get the letter of support. So the only hoop that our model had was this kid would need to go see a therapist once to get the letter. The endocrinologist was arguing it would be a harm reduction model to just go ahead and prescribe to this child hormones at the end of that visit because the child is claiming that they were already on hormones. I was strongly opposed to this idea, and I challenged the endocrinologist, get labs drawn. Let's see if this kid is even on hormones at all. Get labs. If they're on hormones, you're the endocrinologist at the end of the day, it's your decision. But my suspicion was that this kid was making a claim to something that wasn't even true. And lo and behold, there were labs drawn. This child had claimed they were on street hormones, and there was no evidence of any hormone, uh, exogenous external hormone in the child's system at all. Um, I I think as a whole, at least in the US, we are dealing with harm reduction not working as a model. And I I do have concerns that that is where Hillary Cass is going as her approach.
And I think that's a very telling story there. And this concept of harm reduction, it's an interesting one because I used to volunteer at a helpline for children until they kicked me off when I raised concerns. But that's another story for another day. But I still remember around. This is not about the gender stuff. This is about just general self-harm. And as counselors there, we were encouraged not to kind of challenge the self-harm itself or to try and dissuade the children from the self-harm itself, but more to ensure that they were doing it as safely as possible.
Yep.
Yeah. And I kind of went along with that at the time, but my feelings towards that approach have changed over time, actually. It's well, we actually there is a crossover. We see this with the breast binding. A lot of people say, well, just make sure they're doing it as safely as possible.
Yes.
Well, no, as a clinician, I'm not going to be colluding in self-harm, which is what I view breast binding to be, so.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I do think we need to wrap up in a moment. So, James, what I would like to hear from you is what should we be looking at in terms of the timeline for this trial? So I've heard August 1st, so we don't have that much time. So can we check in with you on Twitter? Will you be keeping us all informed? What is your handle and kind of what is our timeline to be watching out for?
Yeah, my handle's James Esses. Like I said, we've got this emergency injunction hearing on the 27th and 28th of July, and I'm hoping we'll have an outcome on the 28th. It's not guaranteed, but I'm hoping we will, and I will publicize that. And so either the recruitment is halted while the proceedings continue, or they're cracking on August the 1st. Regardless of that, in sometime in October, hopefully, we're going to have the substantive judicial review hearings. They might last a week or two, and then there might be another couple of weeks before the result. But by the end of this year, we will know what has happened with our legal proceedings, one way or the other. So those are the basic timelines. But like I said, this could, if the decision doesn't go the way we want, we're going to look to appeal it. So, but buckle up for a longer ride. Yeah.
All right. Well, hopefully we can have you come back after those hearings play out in the fall and you can give us some updates and check back in with you about the UK.
No problem at all. And look, I've got this therapy directory. Although I'm based in the UK, I work with a lot of clients across the world, including in the States, Canada, etc. So, if people are looking for ethical, non-affirmative therapy for themselves, for their children, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll do whatever I can to possibly support you.
Perfect. We'll link that in our show notes. We'll put your X handle and that in our show notes so people can reach out in that way as well. So thank you so much, James, for spending time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thanks very much.
This podcast is produced by the LGB Courage Coalition, a registered United States nonprofit fully funded by small donations like yours. We work to promote evidence-based medicine, ending the medicalization of gender nonconformity, and advocating for LGB rights. Supporting this show means supporting that work directly. If what you heard today mattered to you, please like, subscribe, and pass it along. Word of mouth is how independent shows like this one survive. You can reach us in the Substack comments section or by email at lgbcouragecoalition@gmail.com or through the contact page on our website at lgbcourage.org. We want to hear from you. And until next week, stay informed and ready to dissent.